One of government's primary responsibilities is to protect its citizens. A basic way of carrying out this duty is to provide emergency shelters during disasters and emergencies. Government entities or third parties like the Red Cross usually operate these shelters. The Americans with Disabilities Act generally requires emergency shelters to provide equal access for everyone to the many benefits that shelters provide, including an accessible facility, services, information and effective communication, a place to sleep and eat, and other basic comforts. Some facilities, particularly those built after 1991 or extensively altered after 1991 when the ADA went into effect, may have few or no barriers to accessibility and are good choices for shelters. But other older facilities may have barriers to accessibility, which you should try to remove, if possible, before you use the facility as a shelter. To determine the level of accessibility in a potential emergency shelter, you must do it before a disaster strikes. The following series of videos and pictures will explain how to do that.
Hi, I'm Dave Campbell, your host for this video series. This video series and companion hard copy checklist, which you can find in the resources section of the website, will help you determine the level of accessibility at specific locations and to what extent you can accommodate people with disabilities. If a barrier is present, we'll suggest some practical solutions. Just a reminder, this video and checklist do not cover all the building standards for accessible design from the 2010 ADA Standards for Accessible Design. Rather, we designed these videos to be a practical tool for shelter managers and volunteers. We hope it'll help you address the most important basic building features for handling a wide range of people during a disaster, including people with disabilities. For a comprehensive, unabridged checklist, visit the ADA Department of Justice website by clicking on this link. Let's get started. Here are the tools you'll need when you're looking at the accessibility of a potential emergency shelter. First, bring a smartphone or a digital camera. You'll want to take photos of any elements of concern you found during your survey. It's likely the other people in the decision-making process will need to review information about the facility you are surveying. A second tool you'll need is a metal tape measure. 16 feet or longer should do the trick. You'll need this to measure things like the clear opening of a standard hinged door. The third tool you'll need is a level. It should be at least 24 inches long. You'll use this tool to measure whether a ramp, a parking space, or a walkway is too steep or not. That measurement is called slope, which is the proportion of a vertical rise to a horizontal length. It can be either a ratio, like 1 to 12, or a percent, like 8.33. So a 1 to 12 ratio slope would mean 1 inch of vertical rise for every 12 inches of horizontal length. To measure slope, rest one end of the level at the highest point of the sloped surface, and lift the other end until the bubble is in the middle of the tube. This is the level position. Then measure the distance from the bottom end of the level to the sloped surface below. If the distance is 2 inches or less, then the slope is a 1 to 12 ratio or less. The maximum running slope generally allowed for ramps is 1 to 12. Now, cross slope is the slope or grade of a surface perpendicular to the running slope. For measuring cross slope, if the distance measured from the level position is a ½ inch or less, then the slope is a 1 to 48 ratio or less. The maximum cross slope allowed on an accessible route is 1 to 48. The fourth tool you'll want to have is a door pressure gauge. This allows you to see how many pounds of force is necessary to open a door. They are available to purchase online. The force to open interior doors with automatic door closers should be no more than 5 pounds of force. To use it, place it on the door handle, give it a push in, and then see where the black O-ring ends up. That gives you your pounds of force. If it's too high, adjust the screw on the top of the closer. If the door is too difficult to open, one option is to prop it open. For exterior doors, the ADA has not specified a required force, but it should be as low as possible given the prevailing weather conditions. The last tools you'll need are a printed out checklist along with a clipboard and some pens. Again, to download the checklist, click the link on the screen. Before you start evaluating a facility, take a couple photos that identify the facility, like a shot from the street and a close-up that shows the name of the facility and the address. The best way to evaluate a shelter is to think through the steps a person would take as they approach the shelter and use its services. Start with areas where people will get out of vehicles, like passenger drop-offs, loading zones, and parking areas. Then, move to the various shelter entrances. Once you're inside the building, check out the hallways and doors to the various service areas like eating and sleeping. Then locate the restrooms and any food distribution areas, medical service areas, and relief areas for service animals. If these areas have barriers that would prevent access for people with disabilities, particularly for people who use walkers and wheelchairs and people with visual impairments, this video series will offer temporary adjustment options you can make. You may also want to talk to the facility owner to see if there are any plans in place to remove the barriers. You can mention that if they pay money to remove barriers, there are significant tax write-offs available.
People with disabilities should be able to arrive on the site, approach the building, and enter as freely as everyone else. Make sure there are enough accessible spaces for parking. For 1 to 25 spots in the parking lot, the required minimum number of accessible spaces is 1. For 26 to 50, it's 2. For 51 to 75, it's 3, and so on. Look to see if the accessible parking spaces have a vertical sign with the international symbol of accessibility. And then look to see if the van accessible spaces have van accessible signage. Make sure there are enough van accessible spaces. At least 1 of every 6 accessible spaces must be van accessible, with a minimum of 1 van accessible space in all cases. Van accessible spaces must have a minimum vertical clearance of 8 feet 2 inches for lift-equipped vans. Van accessible spaces must also be 8 feet wide, with an 8-foot wide access aisle. If not, then you can reconfigure the parking layout by placing traffic cones or other temporary barriers to define the parking spaces. 8-foot wide van accessible access aisles work well for deploying lifts and unloading wheelchairs. But sometimes people will unnecessarily park in the aisle or place items in the aisle, like a dumpster. These areas need to remain clear so that users can deploy a wheelchair lift or completely open their vehicle door to unload a wheelchair or walker. One solution to keeping access aisles open is to mark these spaces with orange cones. Check to see if accessible parking areas are maintained. This means the site includes removal of snow, gravel, rocks, carts, and repainting of pavement markers. Then check to see if the accessible parking area is level in all directions, with no built-up curb ramps protruding into the access aisle. If not, there are a couple of solutions. One is to modify the accessible parking area so it has a level access aisle and accessible curb ramp. Or you could move the accessible parking area to a place that is relatively level in all directions. See if the access aisles are part of the accessible route to the accessible entrance. If not, a solution for this is to create a temporary curb ramp. See if there is at least one accessible route of travel from public sidewalks and bus stops to an entrance. There are several questions you should ask about any routes of travel. Is the route at least 36 inches wide? Is the route stable, firm, and slip-resistant? Does the route have a cross slope that is less than 2%. To be safe, the route needs to be nearly flat, side to side. Do curbs have curb cuts or ramps at drives, parking, and passenger drop-offs? Do curb ramps and ramps have slopes no greater than a 1:12 ratio? Do all ramps with a rise greater than 6 inches have handrails and edge protection? Please note that accessible routes with slopes 1:20 or less are not considered ramps. Therefore, they don't need handrails or edge protection. To facilitate a wheelchair or walker user, there should be a 5-foot-long level landing at every 30-foot horizontal length of ramp, at switchbacks, and at the top and bottom of ramps. For a double door, there should be at least one 32-inch leaf.
Ideally, the layout of an emergency shelter should allow people with disabilities to understand and access without assistance all the areas within a facility, like information counters, restrooms, and eating and sleeping areas. All doors should have a 32-inch clear opening. To measure the clear opening of a standard hinged door, open the door 90 degrees. Put the end of the tape measure on the side of the door frame next to the clear opening. Stretch the tape across the door opening to the face of the door. This measures the clear width of the door opening through which people pass, which is less than the width of the door itself. If this space isn't available, you could remove furnishings or other obstacles. Or you could prop the door open during the emergency. Next, make sure all door hardware can be operated with a closed fist. That is, make sure you can open a door without any tight grasping or twisting of the wrist. If you can't open a door with a closed fist, you can prop it open, or grate grips are an inexpensive way to retrofit round doorknobs. Another solution for a hard-to-open door is to replace the knob with a lever or retrofit it with a lever extension.
The circulation route through hallways and corridors to all interior areas should be at least 36 inches wide. If pathways are too narrow, they're not accessible, and you may have to move furnishings like tables and chairs or put up signs to indicate a better route. Any object that protrudes into the circulation route must be detectable by a person with a visual impairment using a cane. The bottoms of drinking fountains should not be higher than 27 inches. Wall-mounted objects like fire extinguishers and lighting fixtures cannot protrude more than 4 inches unless they are below 27 inches or above 80 inches from the floor. And overhead objects must be above 80 inches. If you can't remove the protrusion, place a physical object under the protrusion like a planter or bench to serve as a warning. Open staircases can be an extremely dangerous obstruction. When the underside of a stair is open, it's a hazard to people who are blind or have low vision. Enclosing the area below the stair or installing a cane-detectable barrier like a bench or planter helps the person avoid the area. Interior signs identifying room numbers, permanent room names, exits, and restrooms must have raised characters and braille and a font style that is easy to read. These signs must be on the wall on the latch side of the door, not the hinge side. They must also be within the reach range of 48 to 60 inches above the floor. 60 inches is a good height. As for directional signs and informational signs, they do not need the raised letters or braille. A shelter usually has one or more check-in areas near the shelter's entrance. The accessible check-in area should be at the accessible entrance, or signs should give directions to the accessible check-in area. Check-in areas must have at least one accessible check-in location. That location must have a writing surface that is no more than 36 inches high and at least 36 inches wide for people who use a wheelchair, scooter, or other mobility device. This may be part of the reception counter itself, a folding shelf, an adjacent table, or a clipboard. There must be an accessible route to and throughout the food service and eating areas of the shelter. This route must be at least 36 inches wide and must not have steps or steep slopes. That will allow people who use wheelchairs, scooters, and other mobility devices to get to all the food and drinks and accessible tables and seating. For the food and drink items, make sure all controls for public use are at an accessible height and require no more than 5 pounds of pressure to operate. If necessary, these items could be placed at a lower level or on a nearby table. And for tables and seating, spaces for wheelchair seating must be distributed throughout the eating area. The aisles between fixed seating must be at least 36 inches wide. Each accessible bed or cot must connect to an accessible route that connects to other activity areas, including restrooms and bathing areas. The accessible route should have adequate circulation and maneuvering space in the sleeping area so that a person who uses a wheelchair can move about safely. 36 inches is the standard, but 48 inches is preferred. It's best to place accessible cots next to a wall, and cots should be 17 to 19 inches above the floor for easier transfer from a wheelchair or scooter. In general, each shelter should have electrical outlets and one or more backup generators, so evacuees with a disability can have access to electrical power. If the usual electrical service is available, an appropriate number of electrical outlets needs to be on an accessible 36-inch wide route and at least 15 inches above the floor. If the outlets are too low, one solution is to use extension cords. This is critical for people who need to operate supplemental oxygen, charge the batteries in their wheelchairs or scooters, or to refrigerate medicines. Heavy-duty coolers are also helpful for storing medicines. At least one set of restrooms serving the shelter must be accessible to people who use a wheelchair or other mobility device. Restroom signs should have raised letters and braille mounted on the wall adjacent to the latch at a height of about 60 inches. If there is an existing sign on the door, leave it and add a proper sign on the wall. The restroom door should provide at least 32 inches of clear passage. On the pull side, there should be at least 18 inches of clearance on the latch side of the door, so people using wheelchairs and walkers may position themselves to the side without having to back up. If obstacles like trash bins are in the way, they should be moved. Inside the restroom, there must be an area roughly 60 inches in diameter, where a person who uses a wheelchair or other mobility device can turn around. Also, in front of every element, like sinks, dispensers, and urinals, there should be a clear floor space of 30 by 48 inches. This space can overlap the turning circle, like the yellow rectangle in the picture. There must be at least one wide toilet stall with an outswinging door, side and rear grab bars, and clear floor space next to the toilet. If not, see if there is another more accessible stall available, and put up signs directing people to its location. An outswinging door is not necessary if the stall is located at the end of a row of toilet stalls where there is more space. Accessible toilets should be 17 to 19 inches above the floor and 16 to 18 inches from the near wall. They should have a 60-inch diameter circle next to it and grab bars on the side and rear. Grab bars should be 33 to 36 inches above the floor. Sinks should have a clearance of 27 inches under the front overhang, and no more than 34 inches to the top of the rim. Also, all exposed pipes should be wrapped. Soap, paper, towels, hand dryers, and other dispensers must be within a reach range no more than 48 inches high. In most emergency cases, evacuees are not expected to use shower or bathing facilities because they are only at the shelter for a short stay. But if you'd like to look at shower or bathing facilities to see if they're accessible, here are the details. Shower facilities need to be on an accessible route. Roll-in showers with benches should have controls within reach of the bench. For other accessible shower or bathtub features, such as size and clearance measurements, read the ADA's standards on the United States Access Board website by clicking the link on your screen. Portable toilets are common at emergency shelters as supplements to permanent restrooms. There must be at least one accessible unit. It must be on an accessible route. The entrance must not have a step-up or lip over half an inch. To open the door, there must be 18 inches of clear floor space on the latch side of the door. Inside the portable toilet should be side and rear grab bars and clear space next to the toilet for transferring. Communication within a shelter is critical so that everyone knows where and how to access all the services within a facility, like up-to-date information, check-in, eating, sleeping, medical attention, and restrooms. To this end, shelter personnel need to anticipate how to effectively communicate with those who have visual, hearing, or speech disabilities. Simple solutions are often sufficient, but there may also be instances where certain auxiliary aids and services may be necessary. Some 10 million people are considered blind or visually impaired. This disability is 3 times more frequent than people who use wheelchairs. Most people who are legally blind have some sight and perception of movement. Very few people are totally blind. For people who cannot read information materials, simple solutions include a volunteer available to read instructions aloud and providing large print material in a 16 to 18-point sans serif font. You can also enlarge a standard size print by photocopying it at 120%. Restroom and permanent room number signs should have raised letters and braille. These signs should be mounted on the wall, not the door. It should be on the latch side instead of the hinge side of the door. Most shelters in modern buildings will already have proper signage for their restrooms. In some instances, evacuees may need wayfinding or directional cues within a shelter to find various services. Inexpensive 8-inch plastic cones or inexpensive wide ribbon tape can help people find their way. For anyone who has difficulty hearing, exchanging simple notes or texting via a smartphone, tablet, or computer usually is sufficient. When it's necessary to get everyone's attention, turning the lights on and off is quick and effective. In rare instances, a sign language interpreter may be necessary, but this service is difficult to anticipate and obtain on short notice. Any instructional videos or TV broadcasts should be captioned. In large-scale emergencies that provide live TV updates, a sign language interpreter should sign the spoken words. Some people who have experienced a stroke or have a cognitive disability may have difficulty speaking. Here again, sharing notes and having patience while someone is speaking can be an easy solution. If you're not sure what they are saying, repeat back what you think you heard. A convenient way to share notes is through an app called FireChat. FireChat is free to download and allows users to text one another when no internet connection or wireless coverage is available, which happens often during emergency disaster situations. The U.S. Department of Justice recently defined the term service animal as a dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. In other words, the service animal is a working animal, not a pet. The dog's training must be directly related to the person's disability. Dogs whose sole function is to provide comfort or emotional support do not qualify as a service animal under the ADA. Examples of such work or tasks include guiding people who are blind, alerting people who are deaf, pulling a wheelchair, alerting and protecting a person who is having a seizure, reminding a person with mental illness to take prescribed medications, calming a person with post-traumatic stress disorder during an anxiety attack, or performing other duties. Under the ADA, service animals must be harnessed, leashed, or tethered, unless these devices interfere with the service animal's work or the individual's disability prevents using these devices. In that case, the individual must maintain control of the animal through voice, signal, or other effective controls. When it's not obvious what service an animal provides, only limited inquiries are allowed. Staff can ask 2 questions. 1. Is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And 2. What work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Staff cannot ask about the person's disability, require medical documents, require a special ID card or training document for the dog, or ask that the dog demonstrate its ability to perform the work or task. A person with a disability cannot be asked to remove his or her service animal from the premises unless the dog is out of control and the handler doesn't take effective action to control it, or the dog is not housebroken. When there is a legitimate reason to ask that a service animal be removed, staff must offer the person with the disability the opportunity to receive goods or services without the animal's presence. The dog's owner is responsible for the dog's cleanliness, food, water, and general care, like getting the dog to designated relief areas. For more information, read this service animal's document from the ADA by clicking the link on the screen. And lastly, when you conduct a survey to determine the level of accessibility at a potential shelter, determine if relief areas are available, and then note the location of these areas. You don't have to feel awkward anymore when interacting with or meeting a person who has a disability. The first tip in using proper disability etiquette is simple. Use common sense and extend common courtesies to everyone. Number 2, don't patronize or lean on equipment or the person. Treat adults like adults, not like children. Don't talk down to a person who has a disability. Number 3, when speaking with a person who uses a wheelchair, sit at the same level. If that's not possible, stand a slight distance away so they won't have to strain their neck to make eye contact with you. Number 4, be patient. Depending on their disability, it might take them a little more time to express themselves or to move about. Number 5, relax. Don't worry about accidentally saying something like, "See you later," to a person who is blind. Number 6, speak directly to the person, not through a companion or an interpreter. Number 7, use people-first language. That means not using words like handicapped, afflicted, victim, or retarded. Number 8, reserve accessible parking for those who require it and have the proper identification on their vehicles. Number 9, offer assistance and listen for a response. Then follow any specific directions. And number 10, don't pet, feed, or distract service dogs. They are working animals, not pets. For more information on disability etiquette, check out the United Spinal Association's Disability Etiquette booklet by clicking the link on the screen. This booklet is for businesses, organizations, staff, and disability awareness programs, and provides specific etiquette tips about the different types of disabilities.